Welcome to another episode of Data Analytics Chat. I'm Ben Parker, data recruiter and podcast host, looking to share knowledge and insights with the data community. Today, I'm excited to welcome Michael Hicks, Executive Director at Novartis. In this episode, we'll explore his career journey, pivotal moments that have shaped his career path, and also discuss the topic of can we actually trust generative AI to make decisions? Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Ben, for having me. It's truly an honor. I appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to this topic because it's making headlines, isn't it, across worldwide.
It definitely seems to be the order of the day.
So, do you want to start off with this dive in and share your career journey with the listeners?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate it. My career really started as an academician. I was a research scientist at the Oak Ridge National Labs. This was way back when, longer than I can count, maybe. But that opportunity there presented itself just as a result of my graduate studies in nuclear physics at the time. And back in those days, you really had to write all of your own software code and basically just be a jack of all trades just to get your PhD up and running, all of your research up and running, I should say. During that time, there was a proposed freeze, if you will, on a lot of hiring in universities based upon the lifting of the mandatory retirement age for professors. I believe that happened in about 1994 or so, and during that time, it became more and more difficult to really get quality research positions in the United States, especially in my field. And so basically, what ended up happening was I stepped out of my PhD program and went to went to a software organization to do some consulting on statistical design of experiments and then ultimately testing, like software testing. And that's something that allowed me to kind of step out of academia and step into the world of business. That was and we'll talk about transitions later, and that was a stark transition for me, and basically went from there, and ultimately getting a package, getting laid off from that software testing firm, and going straight into procurement of all things. I was able to kind of parlay some education that I had taken on systems dynamics into and better understanding social systems, organizational systems, and how everything was basically connected inside of a company. Taking that and parlaying that along with a relationship to work in the pharmaceutical industry for the first time. And that really set my career going at that point, because I was able to really use what I had understood as a research scientist, as well as a systems dynamics professional and software testing professional, to really truly understand a lot that really goes on in a pharmaceutical commercial organization. So, taking all the things that I had learned at that point, and the skills that I had, I felt that the major thing that was missing was how to relate and understand people's motivations in basically what they were doing, why they were proposing what they were proposing. And I thought that procurement was a wonderful spot to really start to get to understand that. So get to understand the world of negotiation, the world of coming to agreement. Because I'll never forget a quote that an old manager told me. He said that in science, you pursue the truth, while in business we pursue agreement. Maybe that's a bit pithy or tongue in cheek, but the statement really did resonate with me, because I started to really see what made day-to-day business move forward. And it wasn't so much going to the nth degree to find the truth, as it was, as long as you and I can agree that this is the right direction, we can move things forward together a lot faster. And I basically, took that opportunity over the next few years to really get to understand a pharmaceutical commercial organization from top to bottom. Everything from how they staff and how they look at advertising, all the way to data and running analytics. I got to know the executive manager there at Wyeth Pharmaceuticals way back in the day. for analytics, and she offered me a job. Just because I'd done some excellent work with her with respect to understanding the needs of data and how it's actually used inside the organization to make decisions. And I became an analyst that was responsible for doing secondary data analytics and starting to do primary market research. And that really that career shift allowed me to kind of get back to my roots. Having a degree in physics and earlier in physics and mathematics is something that again, it kind of resonates with who I am in terms of the way that I scientifically approach problem solving, as well as the use of mathematics in that approach. I guess the next few years working in that discipline, it really did allow me to start to understand exactly all the different pressures that the commercial organization was under to ultimately deliver. And knowing what your stakeholders or what your counterparts are going through, and having empathy for that, really is kind of provides a leg up, if you will. It gives you real insight into how to better manage stakeholder expectations, stakeholder perceptions, and then at the same time to be able to deliver for them in a way that allows them to make very, very good, high quality and fast decisions. Unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe depending on your point of view, Wyeth gets purchased by Pfizer, 2010-ish, something like that, 2009, 2010, and I made a decision that we'll talk about a little bit later. I made a decision, to move away from analytics and move back into procurement, to go and do some consulting, to get a broader view of organizations inside and outside of the pharma sector. And I did that for about a year before, going back into the pharma universe, if you will, at Human Genome Sciences, and basically upping my game in procurement to include more than just commercial, but then also non-commercial or the more direct side of the business, like in manufacturing and API procurement. That led me for about a year, led me through to Novo Nordisk, and this was before the true heyday of GLP-1. GLP-1 was just kind of getting started with Victoza, but really, we weren't making nearly the same money that was made in the last few years. But I spent a few years in procurement there before doing the same thing that I turned at Wyeth. I got to know the head of analytics, and she offered me a job in analytics to run their advanced analytics, area there at Novo Nordisk back in about 2016. So I've been in advanced analytics ever since. Last few years being at Novartis, but still running the gamut from basically things like running data science to market mix and advanced targeting to now in the last 6 months being appointed the executive director of field execution effectiveness and bringing data science solutions for this area. So I'll pause. I know that was a long intro to my career, but you can tell that there's a lot to the journey, and it's certainly not a linear one.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. The journey, because I guess not traditional, is it? I think that's the beauty now, isn't it? I think there's so many different avenues you can come in at, especially, I mean, with data now. I think, like you said, when you're doing in your PhD days, doing a lot more of everything now. Obviously, there's people can do a lot of the coding. That duties can be done with the tools now. If you've got that business domain knowledge, I think you're a lot more powerful.
Yeah, it certainly comes in handy, right? The let's just say that the main advantage is that you really get to see that most any crisis that is there in front of you is temporary. There's a lot of stress, I guess you can say, in any job, in any discipline, no matter which one. But then once you go through those in many different environments, you basically start to see the similar elements to each one of them, and learning at that point how to just get through and get past it, staying calm, and just coming to the best solution, short-term solution, and then designing for the long-term solution. Those are the things that you really start to learn the more that you see outside of a single discipline, that these things are pretty common. I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say it's part of the human condition, but I would certainly say it's part of the business human condition that everybody experiences that kind of stress, and being able to manage through it is really what makes for a real difference in, at least in my state of mind on things.
So, and obviously, like you say, you've had many different pivots. I guess when you've gone to like interview, have people like not necessarily like looked down on you, but like really challenged you, like because him does Michael know where he wants to go in his career? Do people do that? Obviously, people, it's a risk, obviously, hiring, isn't it? Obviously, companies need to hire the right people, and even more so, I think, now in data, the way it's going. But did people sort of, did you get that sort of challenge more because you'd been in different job roles?
Yeah, the challenges come in many different forms, right? Like you said, during the recruitment stage and during the even the initial consideration stage, there is this question of authenticity, this question of competence. Can the person perform? There is no track record there, in at least at this particular company or what have you, right? Can this person lead in this new environment or this different environment? And really, it does take a sort of sponsorship on that level, right, to kind of get over that. In other words, it's not just due to your own intellectual capability or due to your own, even your own track record and your current role, or what you're able to even convey in a conversation or in a series of messages. It really does come down to establishing relationships and showing that the trust can be extended beyond what was part of your previous transactions in the relationship. And it's the development of that sponsorship that is so key and so important, and really getting your career to a transformative state where you can move from position to position. And you typically do that by not only delivering on what you need to be delivering, right, but then offering insight and offering a problem solving method, if you will, that resonates with people, that shows that you're thinking beyond the problem at hand, the problem within the problem, if you will, and being able to put the dots together in a cohesive, easy to understand story that people really start to believe that you can add value beyond the initial transaction that you're responsible for. And so I have found that there is a skill to cultivating those things, those kinds of relationships, I should say. And that skill, it really starts with understanding people, understanding and having an empathy for the problems that they're living, and then also being able to bring to the table conceptual framework, problem solving, things that you do strategically that you're able to kind of, like I said, see the forest through the trees. And they start to get to see that you're more than just a transactional partner. You become an advisor, and that's really
Mm.
where your sponsorship comes.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's a big element is the trust element, isn't it? Like, they want to believe you that you're going to come in and deliver. Because that's what businesses need, doesn't it? Like, I think so many businesses nowadays, they get swayed away with like the new shiny toys. Where at the end of the day, like, it's still business. At the end of the day, you need growth. You need the basic business concepts are not going to change. The tools will. So I guess if you can get that buy-in to the individual who's hiring, to illustrate that you can do this. Yeah, I think it's just going to separate you. But I guess on the other side, it is difficult, isn't it, to illustrate that in an interview process?
Yeah, and that process is even nonlinear, right? You kind of have to make sure that you're running into someone who actually values transformative relationships, someone who sees things beyond just their current need, and actually recognizes people as being more than just a job title or a job description. And I'm afraid to say that doesn't exist universally, right? So finding sponsors isn't just as easy as finding people to work with. There is a challenge, right? And whether it's a vice president or a senior vice president in a company, just because they have the title doesn't mean that they think that way. And you can spot them. You can see which ones are primarily utilitarian in nature, and those that are a little bit more seeking of a kind of more of a transformational relationship. And it's those people that once you notice that you want to cultivate a deeper level of involvement with. And like I said, it's not a nonlinear process, and it's not a perfect process, but I definitely have found that by actively seeking sponsorship, you're more likely to get it than by basically leaning back and just relying upon someone to come by and sponsor you.
Mm. And I think just go back to the interview. Like I think it's because a lot more interviews nowadays are obviously initial stages of telephone, and I guess if you're meeting in person, I don't know whether you met in person during these times. It's a lot more easier to build that connection, isn't it, face to face than a Teams call or a telephone call.
It is, and I mean, and like right now, right? You and I are not on video together, and who knows, like who gets distracted, who doesn't get distracted. You can't see the person. There's the that you can't tell if the person is looking you in the eye. If there is a like you said, like a connection
Yeah,
being made, other than just the degree of interaction that you're getting, verbally. So it is harder to actually develop that kind of kindred spirit via a telephone conversation. There's no doubt about that.
yeah, no, it's interesting because obviously there's pros and cons, isn't there, to I guess the video phone interviews. But I guess if you want to build connection, face to face is always better.
I think so, and maybe that just speaks to my age. I would say it's more of a hypothesis on my part than it is anything else, because I wouldn't want to say it's universal, but I would say that that would be my hypothesis. That yes, it's easier to make a connection if I'm able to see somebody face to face and to be able to again read body language, see that they're looking me in the eye, and vice versa, and have that kind of more I guess intimate kind of conversation.
Brilliant. All right, let's move on to the next question then. So, if you had to pinpoint one or two defining moments then that have changed your career growth, what would they be?
Yeah, and good news is I've kind of gone over these things, right? One was when I left academia for business. Academia is just as a political world as businesses. There's no doubt about it. And in academia, it is a lot more, let's just say, cutthroat. The way that you talk with each other and the way that you are kind of expected to behave is, you are expected to point out the smallest of small errors. You're expected to kind of live up to a standard of storytelling and truth telling that it can be quite exhausting for someone who is looking for, let's say, validation. Right. If you're looking for validation, my word of advice is not to go to the world of academia, especially not the world of experimental science, because you're not going to get it very often. You will get more questions and answers, and you will definitely get more that how should I say, shade than praise. Now, in business, right, the way that you actually, critique something then becomes just as important as the critique itself, right? And that was something that I had to learn. There is a more of a human side in business that I found than what I found in academia. It's just as competitive. It's just as tight of a race, if you will, but there is a softer edge to the way that you talk with people and the way that you interact with people, to make sure that that, hey, look, you're not going to damage an ego, and there is a 8-to-1 praise to constructive criticism ratio that you try to adhere to try to make sure that you keep morale going and that teams are well supported. Positivity in business is a real thing, and it's something that I've leaned into full throat and a full throttle ever since I got into business, because I do believe that that is the way that people get motivated, right? Through positivity. It doesn't mean that there's no constructive criticism or feedback. It just means that you develop a positive atmosphere and you get a lot more out of that business enterprise than not.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
second, oh, I'm sorry, Ben, what was that?
Yeah, that's just meant. Yeah, exactly. I think if you're in a negative environment, it's not going to add to you, is it? Like if you keep, obviously you need to learn, but it's the way I guess the manner in you do it. But if you're building that environment where, yeah, you've done a good job, but could you try this? Just having that different slant. I think there's different ways to it, isn't there?
Yeah, there is, and I'm probably the last person on the planet that actually watched Ted Lasso, and so when I did, I was thoroughly engaged and enjoyed the kind of atmosphere that positivity kind of brings, and at the end of the day, it is something that, like I said, I've definitely leaned into, and I have gotten a lot more out of myself and out of teams, for that. The second one was when I left procurement for analytics the first time. There was there was a sense of relief and a sense of kind of belonging that I felt when I went to analytics the first time that I didn't feel while I was in procurement, and it's something that it just probably owes to the degree of resonance that I have internally to just the world of analysis and the world of taking a problem and breaking it down into its component parts and developing, again, in some cases mathematical, other cases logical connections and solutions to a problem that's stated. And whether, no matter how simple or complex, it's something that just drives me. And I was able to kind of get back home at that point. And that was something that I told myself at the time whenever I moved into it, that regardless of whatever happens in my career, I will end my professional journey in my lifetime in an analytics role. So whenever that happens, 10, 20 years from now, whatever it is, I will still be in some analytics role capacity. Because it is something that is resonant with me, and I think it took going away to kind of realize that's something that is kind of a part of me, a kind of a core part of me that I now just need to just enjoy and exploit, to make myself feel mentally healthy.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing that you've done that shift, because I think today, like with people's careers, don't they become that technical expert in whatever area, and then that move to leadership or the next jump, that's the big challenge for a lot of people. So I guess just going back, when you sort of moved industries or sorry, business domains, what was your thinking then? Because that must have been a big risk for you, going from sort of procurement to analytics.
Ben, I never really even felt it was a risk. I felt it was a greater risk, to be quite frank with you, to leave academia. The risk to move to analytics, it felt like a downhill slope for me. And really, I think it's because I got to know the team in that analytics community, that while I was there at Wyeth, I got to know them because of my role in procurement, and I got to have the conversations with them. I was able to work with them, albeit in a different kind of professional capacity, to see how they thought, to see what was really driving the decisions that they were making, and it just all made logical sense to me. And like I said, I think that having that systems dynamics and mathematics background really did actually make me interlock with that world of analytics much better than maybe another person from procurement would have been able to do. And that's why I kind of felt more like a fish out of water in procurement than I did coming to analytics. So like I said, it felt like a downhill ride to me.
Okay, interesting. So I guess it just felt right at the time. So I think if anyone's sort of wanting to make that transition in their career, just trust your heart. I guess should be the message.
Well, you trust your heart, but also make sure to check your brain, right?
Yeah,
Because you better be able to deliver. And knowing SQL, knowing programming, knowing statistics, these things are important. Having a passion for, let's say, being a concert pianist definitely doesn't put me on the stage at Carnegie Hall, right?
yeah,
I mean, I better know the material. I better been a practitioner for quite some time, and then I better stay up on my game. And that's something that I can profess that I had always done, whether it's doing mathematics puzzles or going back and actually challenging myself to take mathematics or computer programming courses. That's something that I always did, even while I was in procurement. So even though I was in a different profession, I was still taking my practice swings.
yeah. No, I think again, but it's been sensible, isn't it? If just because I run doesn't mean I'm going to be the next top sprinter. If you get what I mean.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's a great way of putting it.
Okay, cool. So have you faced a major career setback?
Yeah, I guess it really depends on how we define setback, right? And when I think of setbacks, I think of like job loss or a missed promotion or even a demotion or something like just having a difficult negative project outcome. And these things can be, somewhat of a setback. And I would say for me, the decision to leave analytics and go back to procurement was a self-inflicted setback. I made that decision out of fear. When Wyeth was purchased by Pfizer, I'd only been in an analytics position at that point for a few years. And when that purchase happened, of course, there's always this massive shakeup at an organization, and they start to look at talent that is currently there. And when you've only been doing something for a few years, you're a senior manager at the time, and you might have, at least I felt at the time, that I felt a bit exposed, right? I didn't have the skins on the wall that my other peers had by that point in time. And so, before they made the decision, I made the decision for myself. And that's when I went into consulting. And years later, when I look back on that, I felt that I didn't really do myself a very good service by doing that. So making a career choice out of fear is something that I learned at the time is not is well, let's just say, I don't want to ever say never, but certainly is not something that would lead to great outcomes most of the time. And so I've decided ever since then that no matter what I do in my career, that I am going to make a let's just say a balanced yet at the same time value based approach to my next career selection. That in other words, I wouldn't stay on a job out of fear, and I wouldn't leave a job out of fear, and I wouldn't jump to a job out of fear. I mean, things would actually have to line up. I would have to feel good about leaving and feel good about going to another another assignment, and I would never do it out of a fear or frustration. In other words, negative motivations rarely lead to positive results, and that's something I've definitely learned to believe in ever since that time. So that's how I've been making my career decisions since.
And I guess it's just looking back now for you, it's probably that's a good learning curve for you to go through.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's a life learning curve.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, you can apply what I said to basically any major decision in life. If you whether it's choosing university, choosing spouse, choosing whatever it is that's in your power of choice. If you are leaning into a fear based decision, it's rarely going to lead to a good result.
And I think it's things like you need to just learn your lesson. Don't keep repeating it because that's when you've just you're not going nowhere.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Brilliant. That's good insight. So obviously the industry's obviously hyper competitive. So what do you think's giving you a genuine edge?
Definitely my systems thinking. That is something that I've noticed is lacking in a lot of analysts, managers, all the way up to VPs. Systems thinking in terms of really being able to step back, try to understand this complex feedback system, right? Where everything can be viewed as kind of like stocks and flows, right? In my industry, in the pharma sector, we're all about patient flow, patients flowing from not being diagnosed, to being serviced through whether it's a procedure or through a script, and then they're cycling through these things, hopefully to a cure or to some better life or better lifestyle, right? So these represent major opportunities, right, to ultimately lean in and help to induce a greater rate of flow, or say a maintenance of stock. And so you can see this in anything from whether you're managing a pool hall, right, all the way to managing Coca Cola, understanding that every business is basically a very complex system, and it rises and falls on these feedback loops, these dynamic feedback loops, and being able to take that into the ordinary course of conceptual framework thinking is something that has definitely set me apart. So, for example, in my very first role as an analyst, when we were working on a product, there was a question of how customers would flow from one state to another, and you can use certain mathematics to help to figure out, like, not only what is that rate of flow, but what can we do to increase that rate of flow, what's in our power versus what is outside of our control. And we were able to use that kind of an analysis to figure out that certain forms of advertising or certain forms of face-to-face selling would actually increase that rate of flow if done at a certain period of time. And that analysis yielded great results for that product. And from that point, it was, how should I say, rock steady, right? In other words, I was able to actually use that kind of thinking in a completely differential way than what my peers typically do. So that's on the technical side. And I think here lately, in the last 5 to 7 years, Ben, to be quite frank with you, it's been a lot less technical. Points more to what we were talking about maybe 10 minutes ago in terms of establishing a positive atmosphere on my team. My team, you basically sees me as someone who is competent, somebody who is capable of having that conversation with them about the most detailed model that they have. But I hire people that are smarter than me, so they don't need me to come in and tell them how to interpret or how to set up a hidden Markov model for an analysis. Right? They already know how to do these things. But to actually establish the positive atmosphere of growth, curious learning, and really, kind of fearless, failure, they feel much more empowered to act and ultimately to behave in not just in a professional way, but in a very fast forward thinking way. And my teams in the last, say, 10, 15 years have all been very high performing, high productive teams. And I do point back to this idea of just establishing this positive culture of self accountability, and most importantly, reliance upon each other. That's something that I preach to the team, and it's something that we live by. That we rely upon each other to get by through thick and thin. We're there for each other, and they can count on the fact that their teammate has their back. And that's something that has definitely differentiated me from a lot of my peers.
Yeah, I like you touched that because I think also that becomes a lot of emphasis on you being self-aware of where you're at and your team's at and where the gaps are. Because if you don't know where the areas where you're like have the least knowledge and you hire in a different area, obviously it's going to imbalance the team, isn't it?
That's right. That's exactly right. And my current manager has a fantastic philosophy, and no jerks allowed, right? And it's obviously a little pithy, tongue in cheek, but at the same time, it is something that we hire for, right? We hire for people that have a demonstrative set of empathy skills. People who really do value other people the way that other people should be valued, because really, no matter what we do in the end of the day, and maybe this is odd to say on an AI podcast, but this is still a human enterprise. And humans do get by on relationships and do get by on really having a better understanding of each other. And it is something that, like I said, is when you establish that kind of environment and you bring in the right people, it can actually become very self-sustaining.
Yeah, and if you keep bringing in good people, people want to learn from people, don't they? Like, end of the field is so large now; you can't know it all. So if you can learn from somebody else, it's just end day that's going to impact your career because you're constantly learning. I think on the flip side, when you stop learning, that's when it becomes a challenge. Because if you stop learning, you're going to get bored because your brain's not getting challenged.
Well said. And to be quite frank with you, one of the things that we do interview for is like intellectual curiosity. How curious have you shown yourself in your career to learn the extra thing, to go beyond the role and learn? Like if you're in, let's say, market access analytics in my sector, and you learn a little bit of finance, that's only going to help you. If you're in field force analytics and you learn marketing, that is only going to help you. Knowing things outside of your field and being able to bring them back is something that, again, it's more than just the transactional art of, hey, I added something to a project. It shows something more about your character. And it's that character learning that we really do lean in on, where I work, in terms of how we hire and ultimately how we cultivate.
Exactly. Okay, so let's move into the data topic of the
Excellent.
podcast, and it's obviously on generative AI. As yeah, it's massive, isn't it? I think what's happening on the market, but I guess it's good to understand, like, can we actually trust the data? Because a lot of business decisions will be made. So obviously you want to be making sure we're making the right decision, because you want, as a business and in your career, you want to keep that growth and success proceeding. So, what does it really mean to trust an AI system? How is that different from trusting a human?
This is a fantastic question and one I've given a lot of thought to, Ben. It really does first, and I think we have to baseline with each other and the audience, right? Like, test yourself, right? What does trust actually mean? When you think about there's a confidence, right? Trust, is a explicit confidence, right? That you have a belief in the reliability, right? Or the integrity and maybe even the character of something, whether it's a person or a thing. And when you think about AI, right? What you're really believing in more than anything else is just like consistent performance and being able to cite a source, right? You cite sources and it consistently performs, then you start to kind of develop, trust with it. Whereas when you kind of relate that to human trust, right? Now you're betting on your own judgment, right, of someone's intentions and this ability to adapt to some unforeseen circumstances, right? And so, I could say intrinsically that with the AI system, you're banking on reliability, right? Whereas with a human being, you're basically banking on things that are part of your previous previous interactions, what you know about them. And if you don't know anything about them, that's where this idea of truth default theory comes into play. Which and the audience can look this up from Timothy Levine. In the last few years, he wrote about this, about having this when you interact with a human being for the first time, there's a theory, right, that most of us will basically implicitly trust that person the first time you come in contact with them. And it's only over time, when evidence shows that you shouldn't be trustful of the person, then you do switch from trust to non-trust. That is not something that we typically grant, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence will say something to you, and if it just sounds wrong or seems wrong, you don't instantly trust it. And so there is a difference in the way that, at least I believe, in the way that we are actually approaching, AI versus humans. And maybe that's just due to the nascent stage that we're in right now with artificial intelligence and large language models.
And then, do you think we're trusting AI systems too much at the moment, or do you think?
Well, AI systems run everywhere, right?
Mm,
I mean, probably in places that that you and I are not even aware of, whether it's in air traffic control down to, self-guiding, cars and self-guiding, missiles for defense. These things that again, parts of your audience may be much more familiar with than I am. And so when we say, do we trust in it too much? I would say that depending upon the nature of what it is, right, we probably have no choice but to trust in it, because it performs calculations and manipulations at a speed that no group of humans could ever wish to even get to. So you almost have to, in some cases, implicitly trust it, because otherwise you won't be able to move forward in that field. And so it's perhaps it's there where you need to have things like auditability and how should I say, the kind of like some of the technical safeguards around artificial intelligence that lend to explanatory artificial intelligence, where it's explaining why it's making the decisions that it's made. And so it gives you at least the comfort to understand, what is going on. But at the end of the day, you still have to rely upon it, because again, without it, you're not going to be able to move forward in that field.
yeah, no, it's interesting, and yeah, like I said, it's not, obviously AI has been around for a while. It's not. I think it's just obviously made headlines, isn't it, recently? I think it's, yeah. I mean, you always get on people on LinkedIn, don't you, trying to outsmart like ChatGPT or anything like that. But I guess things will go wrong, isn't it? Like, there's things there will be some errors. It's not going to be a perfect 100% of the time. But I think, yeah, a lot in the. I think a lot of people now, you do, if you're using ChatGPT, and if you do take it for granted, don't you, that it's going to be right all the time.
Or at least that when it's wrong, it's not going to have severe
Yeah,
consequences.
yeah, yeah.
It's one thing to tell you that you need a teaspoon of salt in your cookies versus a half a teaspoon versus a 1 degree angle being off whenever you are trying to fly a drone in a military zone. I mean, so it always comes down to consequences, right? And that's where accountability is so key in being able to kind of establish clear lines of oversight on those things, especially when the stakes are so high.
Yeah. So also, as we can move to the next question. So how do we show accountability when a decision made by, say, generative AI causes harm? Who's responsible?
Well, and maybe this is slightly controversial, but I would say there is no way that you can actually, in any meaningful way, hold AI responsible. At the end of the day, what are you going to do? Just unplug it? I mean, it has no feelings. It has no moral character. There's no morality being expressed by the AI. What's basically happening is that you have humans who deploy a system, right? So you've got developers, you've got organizations, policymakers, decision makers. Basically, it's never AI, at least not at this stage of our development, right? It's never AI that decides to deploy AI. And so you'd have to look back at how AI is being deployed and really how discoverable are you making its decision making. If you're keeping it opaque on purpose and keeping it a black box on purpose, well, there's an intentionality to that. And I do understand that there is a cost. I mean, you don't make a clear box AI for free, right? There is a cost to actually developing explanatory AI. But if you decide to make it opaque or completely non-transparent, there is a way that we can say that you're not culpable in that situation. And again, are we talking about inventing the next interesting recipe for lasagna, or are we talking about cybersecurity, or are we talking about national defense? I mean, so to me, it always starts with, okay, what's the subject matter, what's the consequences of failure, and how much governance do we actually need then based upon those consequences? And then after you basically establish that, you can then basically root out where the accountability is.
Yeah, so I think as it gets more advanced and widespread, I think guaranteeing the safety and responsible use of AI models is going to become more paramount, isn't it?
It is, and it makes you wonder where that's coming from, right? It's almost like I guess the now debunked bystander effect. It's almost like where you have 8 or 9 people standing around, and they all notice that there's an issue that needs to be addressed, and everybody's pointing at each other, thinking that the other person is going to do something about it. So, is it the government? Is it going to be some kind of watchdog committee? Is it a independent group of organizations that have formed their own block? Is it an organization? Is it an individual? I mean, the distribution of potential responsibility becomes a problem in terms of being able to say that this is now going to be held accountable, right? And so while I don't propose to say that here's the solution for doing it, I can say that having one group of people control that is probably not going to be the right solution. It's usually going to be, in my opinion, it'll probably be better off being federated between 2 or 3 different balancing powers that would be able to better hold the outcomes of artificial intelligence decision making accountable, and obviously the organizations involved in the development of that artificial intelligence and capital.
Yeah, so I think it's all about establishing like clear framework and guidelines because you will. I guess also it's going to differ from different companies, isn't it? If you've got a startup, obviously they've got a smaller team, and like compared to a large corporate. But again, I think you do need to have that accountability and a framework set so multiple different people have got the responsibility and accountability for it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Um, so, if we dive into the legal, ethical, and operational questions surrounding AI decision making in real world settings, are there specific types of decisions Gen AI should never be allowed to make?
I guess when it kind of points back to some of the things that I was talking about with respect to consequences. So when you're talking about decisions that involve fundamental human rights, right? Irreversible life altering consequences, or maybe even just some things that have complex moral trade offs, right?
Mm.
Should have very meaningful human involvement in those things. So you think about things like criminal sentencing, right? Medical treatment decisions, and then even getting down to like child custody decisions in court, right? Those things in my mind shouldn't be fully automated. Now, maybe statistically speaking, if you run thousands of experiments and you may find out that it makes better decisions, but still it's very difficult to be the person or be the group of people involved in making the single decision, because the individuals are what makes it hard and not the statistical in count. It's when you're having to make those individual decisions and letting that be automated. That's where I think that, maybe we all would feel that bit of moral discomfort.
Yeah, no, I guess it's on the situation, isn't it? Because you're talking about some of the topics you just mentioned there. They're obviously they're highly more sensitive than other, just asking, what shall I cook for dinner? That sort of thing.
Yeah. Or like what part of Paris should I visit in this next 8-day trip? Exactly.
Brilliant. Okay. And then can Gen AI truly understand human context, nuance, and values, or is it just predicting patterns based on data?
Yeah, I don't think that AI even understands, right? And I put that in quotes, right? I mean, understanding is part of being human, right? And then when we add another layer onto it of human context, right? I still think we're leagues behind that. So like, I think that what AI is extremely good at that humans are not, right? Things like high speed calculations, pattern recognition, as long as it's probably not visual. And then, kind of just making the connection between calculations and pattern recognition and doing those at blindingly fast speeds. That I think it does extremely well. But I don't think that just because I'm sitting in a Waymo in San Francisco and it basically sees a human being, 3 feet, from the moving car or a car that's about to move, and it decides not to move. I don't think that that constitutes genuine understanding that by moving you're going to kill somebody and that's going to carry lifelong difficulties for any of the occupants and in the vehicle. And there, in other words, there's no context. It's I see this, so I stop. So it's a rule based system, and as simple as that. So I don't believe that we could say that there's any understanding of human context. And we're not even talking about things like cultural nuances, right? Things that are kind of embedded in language and embedded in behavior. We're talking about some of the most basic things of understanding of human consequences when decisions are made, and potential lifelong impacts that are that are felt years after the decision is made. And those are the contexts that it's certainly not capable yet of actually understanding.
Yeah, interesting. Because it was something interesting I did. I took a photo of my palms and then I scanned that into Chat GPT. Um, and the results I got was quite fascinating. So I think if anyone's not done that, do it. It's quite interesting to get a read. Yeah, I think obviously human context is it's a different subject, isn't it? Really.
It is, and it has a wide berth, right? So, like your example is a wonderful one. Recently, my daughter went to an AI camp, right? And this is what one of the things they did. They said, let's redesign a room based upon this chat engine's understanding of the details that it sees. Can you write a rich enough prompt to kind of come back and approximate a look and feel that matches what you're looking for? And it is quite remarkable, really, how stunning that the output is. And so I agree with you. The interesting, if anybody in the audience hasn't done that, they definitely should. And then you ask the question, by doing that and by providing let's say the right kind of lighting, knowing that it is closer to dusk than it is to noon, and the outdoor lighting through the windows, knowing that the person would probably like to, to see, say, gold framing around a photograph versus stock black, wooden frame. These things, it's picking up, my opinion, picking up out of the data and less out of, I think that this is what this human being would actually resonate with in terms of what they desire to feel like whenever they're in that room.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So Gen AI can make faster, more rational decisions than humans. Should we override our own instincts and defer to it?
Well, again, and boy, I'm going to sound like a consultant here, right? It depends. That let's say that we're 50 years in the future, 100 years in the future, and for whatever reason, we have advanced so fast and so far that we can remove all forms of individuals driving on freeways and highways and byways, back roads, and everything else, and everything can be done via autonomous driving vehicles, right? And it does so safely. That's something where you can say, the speed and rationality is a very good option because, quite oftentimes, you could say that most accidents are not really accidents. I mean, they're results of poor decisions being made by human drivers, right? Distracted driving, drunk driving, driving with a defective vehicle, etc. These things are things that AI wouldn't do, right? And so at the end of the day, there could be better outcomes that way, but at the same time, right, speed and rationality, they're not everything, right? So, human intuition oftentimes incorporates, really important information that's hard to quantify, right? And so I think that, AI is probably a powerful tool right now, at least in its, current incarnation, to really inform human judgment rather than, replace it. Um, in other words, I would hate that if we put in the hands of AI, like, should we go to war or should we not go to war? And have that result down to basically we have a 50.1% chance of winning versus 49.9% chance. So let's just go ahead and do it. Right. There's certain things that I would rather have human intuition step in to handle versus having AI handle.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's case by case, isn't it? It's obviously some are more severe than others, really. But then again, could you? It depends on the person. No, I'm joking. Is it? Can you trust that person?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, in many cases, yeah. I mean, it does come down to case by case, but I think like a general rule, right? Deferring to AI will be that way, right? It'll come down to you're consistently seeing better outcomes. You're consistently getting to from A to B in a way that's safe and basically non destructive. And I know that we're probably running on time, but I'll just say, if you remember back when Google Maps first came out and was accessible via a phone, and the first time that you were instructed to go from A to B using an alternate route, and there's this almost feeling of loss of autonomy, and like, how can this thing know I always go this way? This is the easier, faster way. And then that one time you decide to take it, you find out I did get there 2 minutes earlier, 3 minutes earlier, whatever the case is, right? And I actually saw something different for the first time in years. It can lead to much better outcomes, right? And so sometimes you learn to defer to it, because I can tell you now. I mean, if I had to drive from here to LaGuardia Airport, there is no way on God's green earth I would do it without Google Maps. I would just pop in the destination, and that's how we're going to go. So I wouldn't even think about it. I would be like, this is exactly how we're going to go. That's how much I have basically learned to defer to that version of AI, because again, the results have been reliable, and whenever it wasn't reliable, the consequence wasn't disastrous.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a great example. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant, Michael. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. Obviously, congratulations on your career today. It's obviously interesting to hear the different routes you've gone down. Yeah, I'm sure listeners will find it helpful, and you've provided some great advice today.
Yeah, Ben, I definitely appreciate the opportunity, and you have turned me into a loyal listener even before this particular podcast. So I appreciate the opportunity, and maybe one day join you again.
Brilliant. Was people like yourself, good guests, making me look good. Thank you.
All right, Ben, take care.